Now it's time to hear from David and Judith about the research that's been undertaken as part of the Disability Alive project. Can I welcome David and Judith up here, please? Thank you.
Yes, sure. It'd be great. It's good to be here. As you heard earlier, Neighbourhood Houses Victoria, for whom I work, is one of the partners in the Victoria Alive project, and our focus has been on doing some research to understand a whole bunch of things, really, but particularly what was going on currently in terms of inclusive practice amongst the community sector, and also to gain a good understanding of the needs and the challenges that organisations face in particular. So just a fairly simple brief. So to go about doing that, we looked at what's called a mixed methods approach, basically. So we undertook a literature review of issues relating to volunteering for people with disability. We took a survey of organisations from across the community sector, so quite a diverse range of respondents in that survey. And then we conducted some follow-up focus groups just to try and dig deeper into what the data was telling us about what was going on in the community sector. In addition, we did a series of case studies, which you're about to hear about, and they were collected from organisations who are actually doing quite well in achieving good outcomes in terms of volunteering for people with disability. And then we also did a series of interviews with people with lived experience who were volunteering, just to cross-check that what we were hearing from the organisations was resonating or was shared perspective from people with that lived experience. The reason we had to do all that is because whilst there's lots of literature out there around the experience of volunteering and other experiences, employment and other sort of realms of activity for people with disability, it's not a lot about the organisational side of the equation. So we didn't find much that gave us much insight into what are the challenges, what are the experiences, what are the enablers for organisations. One of the best ways to find that out was to do the case studies. So we asked Judy Buckingham, who has decades of experience as a researcher, as an advocate and as an educator in this space, to conduct some case studies and do some other research for us, and she will tell you about some of those outcomes now.
Thank you. The organisations that we chose, we wanted to get some fairly diverse organisations. So we had one very large urban disability service, a moderately large neighbourhood house, and a small men's shed. What we found was that the disability cohorts are very different, but some of the strategies that all three used were very similar, and these are the results. The first one is XYZ. We promised everybody confidentiality, so I can't actually name or give very many details about the actual organisations. But it's a very large disability service organisation. And inclusion has been a long time part of their culture because they consider that they provide a better service for their clients if they're seen to be inclusive. So, for instance, if they have a person with disability on reception, it acts as a visible reminder for visitors and clients that they are embracing inclusion. To this end, they've set organisational targets to ensure 15% of their paid employment are people with disability, and 15% of their volunteers also have disability. The factors which contribute to their success, because they are actually reaching their targets, is first of all training. All paid and volunteer workers undergo an induction which focuses on the techniques and courtesies of working with people with disability, as well as the conditions leading to the impairment. This is followed by an experiential lunch where attendees are made to experience impairment. Then the newcomers meet with a group of clients and invited to ask any questions, however silly, about disability. Apparently this is very, very popular, great fun. And on occasion they also ask not only their employees but also some of their outside contractors to attend these things. The second thing is the role descriptions. These are carefully scrutinised to ensure that they don't inadvertently exclude people with disability. For example, by asking for applicants to have a driver's licence when it's not a vital part of the role. And all role advertisements always invite people with disability to apply. They also ensure that they have practical aids and software available, and they have accessible information policy to ensure that no one is unable to access organisational information at any time. Now, this is a large organisation, and as they say, they are not living hand to mouth, and it is expensive for them to run this sort of programme, but they're very happy to wear the costs. Case study 2 is a neighbourhood house in an urban setting. They have volunteers with mental health issues and mild intellectual disability acting as peer mentors to others with mental illness. This has been very successful and includes the volunteers planning and implementing social activities for the weekends. When the local mental health facility closed in 1993 as a result of deinstitutionalisation, a lot of previous patients who had no family or community support ended up at the neighbourhood house. Some were no longer taking their medication, there were behavioural problems, and participants left, putting considerable stress on the organisation. However, the manager of the house was an ex-psychiatric nurse. She started by creating partnership with a local mental health organisation, whereby they provided staff training in return for her presence on the board. More partnerships were formed with more mental health organisations. Strict procedures were put in place so that relevant information about referred patients was passed on. The procedures and partnerships are still in place today, although some mental health organisations have changed, but they've also augmented these with partnerships with housing services as well. All staff are put through training run by mental health organisations, and speakers on mental health are programmed into staff meetings. There is an awareness, however, that there are changes in the disability service organisations and the quality of their staff following the introduction of the NDIS. The manager has always had the backing of her committee of management. And what she said was they could see I was confident, I could make it work, and could deal with it. And they felt I could take it on. Case study 3. Peter, which is not his real name, is the volunteer vice president of a rural men's shed associated with another community organisation. Peter started volunteering at first with a food bank when he came out of hospital following treatment for a painful and debilitating condition as part of his Centrelink commitment. However, meeting someone from the men's shed, he joined this instead. The shed started as just a coffee group, and although they now have a workshop, they also run a singing group and an art group. And no, they don't exclude women, but most of the women don't want to come. As part of the community organisation, access is excellent, and the men provide support for those at the shed who might need it. The men's shed is about men's health. The men there have a range of disability, and they look after each other. They try to learn about disability by getting speakers in regularly to talk to them about various impairment or condition members of the group are experiencing. For instance, they have one member who has a terminal illness, and they found a speaker on palliative care. As you can see, there are trends running through this. So 2 of the features that all 3 organisations have in common are, first of all, training. The efficacy of organisational-wide ongoing face-to-face training is clearly demonstrated. In each case, it's also pertinent to the impairment the volunteers and other staff experience, rather than being of a generic nature. And the importance of this kind of training was reflected both in the literature and in the focus groups. We found that managers and volunteer coordinators lack the confidence to take on people with disability, and training, especially in the presence of somebody with a disability, can improve this enormously. The second thing is a culture. A culture which accepts diversity as a matter of course is reflected in these studies. It may be a culture which is embedded over time, or it may be something that has been prompted by necessity and enhanced by strong leadership, or simply, as in the case of the men's shed, a culture of mateship. Other features we found the assistance of strong partnerships, provision of resources to support people with disability, written procedures, and lack of physical access were also recurring throughout the research process. And from what I'd like to say that with everything to do with inclusion, what we found overall was size doesn't matter. Everybody can move towards inclusion.
I might need you.
We've got I was just going to say that was a wonderful presentation by David and Judith, and we've got a few minutes, so we might open it up for questions if anybody has any. Not one. Not one question. Need to project.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the importance of procedures. And I guess that's possibly one of the areas that many organisations are lacking. Would you have any suggestions from the case studies you did about the kind of procedures that would be really important to consider when thinking about inclusiveness?
Okay, now I'm speaking about something that is a big bee in my bonnet. One of the things I've discovered was how few organisations have disability or diversity action plans. And for me, this is something that is really a good start, because everything else will then fall in place on top of that.
And
Sorry? Do I have a disability action plan?
they do. Excellent.
You do have, good. That's terrific.
Any other questions?
Interested in, I'd be interested in looking at what were the aspects of culture within the organisation that really stood out to you as being the make or break. What are the aspects that you absolutely need in culture?
Look, it was surprising because this actually became evident in the data, even though there was no questions about leadership. It was possible to discern that the culture within the organisations and the leadership, because if there is a key element, it seems to be about leadership. It's about people who are prepared to make this happen. And what we could see in the data was that some organisations were going to make it happen regardless. What was fascinating for me was that the organisations who had reported having higher rates of participation in volunteering for people with disability actually reported more barriers than the ones that didn't. And what that clearly says is there's an attitude embedded in that organisation that says, but it ain't going to stop me. And it hasn't stopped them.
All right. Does anybody have a burning question? We do. That might be the last one, given this was impromptu.
I just wanted to ask if the NDIS opportunities with that will influence organisations, do you think, in terms of what's possible for an individual to participate in a volunteering opportunity, and whether or not that's some kind of not a carrot, but some kind of information that those organisations may feel that they don't have at the moment to move forward in terms of assistance. For example, looking at reasonable adjustments or capacity building, or what they can access in terms of training for staff or other things as well. So I just thought, does that research reflect on what opportunities there may be coming up?
Look, one of the difficult things was, in fact, that particularly some of the smaller organisations, well, actually some of the larger organisations as well, were finding that with the NDIS, things have become very competitive, and they are getting less help since the introduction of the NDIS than they were before, which is a great pity. One of the other things is that I don't know whether this is going to change, but as yet it seems that volunteering is not counted as an activity which is funded by the NDIS. And this is something, one of the things, particularly with the smaller organisations, said, we don't feel confident. If somebody, for instance, with cerebral palsy turns up and they need help with toileting, we haven't got the time to do that. We're very happy to have people with any sort of disability, but we need support. Now, if people don't come with their own support, this creates problems for everybody. So if with the NDIS can provide that support, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Well, I might ask everyone to join me in thanking David and Judith. That was a fantastic piece of research.